If you believe in justice, in consequences, and in the power of one fearless voice to shake a system built on arrogance, then stop scrolling right now, because this story will leave you stunned, furious, and ultimately inspired. And before we begin, make sure you subscribe, because the stories we tell here aren't just drama. They're wake-up calls America needs to hear. This is the story of how a rich bully slapped a black teacher in front of an entire school, and how, less than 24 hours later, she filed a $5 million lawsuit that sent shockwaves from the classroom to the courthouse, from the PTA boardroom to the evening news, and into the very heart of a town that thought money could buy silence. The town was Briarwood Heights, a manicured suburb outside Chicago, where Teslas hummed down tree-lined streets and reputations were inherited like trust funds. And at the center of the storm stood Malcolm Kensington III, heir to the Kensington development empire, a man who had never been told no without firing someone afterward, whose son attended Briarwood Preparatory Academy, and whose name was engraved on the new science wing. The teacher he slapped was Dr. Althea Brooks, a respected AP government instructor with 2 master's degrees, a doctorate in constitutional law, and 15 years of spotless service. A woman whose calm authority could quiet a classroom with a glance and whose students consistently scored in the 98th percentile statewide. The incident happened during a Thursday afternoon parent-teacher conference after Malcolm's son, Trevor Kensington, had been suspended for plagiarizing a research paper and attempting to bribe a classmate to stay silent. Dr. Brooks had documented everything meticulously, citing academic integrity policies and providing printed evidence from plagiarism detection software. But Malcolm walked into the conference room already seething, tailored suit sharp as a blade, cufflinks flashing under, fluorescent lights, and he didn't sit. He paced, accusing her of targeting his son, of having an agenda, of trying to make a statement, his voice rising until other parents in the hallway turned their heads. Dr. Brooks remained composed, explaining policy, offering options for academic probation, emphasizing that consequences were part of growth. But when she mentioned that favoritism would undermine the integrity of the entire class, Malcolm's face changed, something dark and entitled, flickering behind his eyes, and he leaned across the table, sneering. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" To which she replied evenly, "A parent whose child violated school policy." And that was the moment it happened. His hand moved faster than anyone expected, a sharp crack echoing against the conference room walls as his palm struck her cheek, the sound freezing time itself. There was a gasp from the hallway, a coffee cup shattering somewhere, Trevor whispering, "Dad," in horror. But Malcolm had already stepped back, breathing hard, as a red mark bloomed across Dr. Brooks's face. She did not cry, did not shout. She straightened her blazer, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "This meeting is over," before calmly walking out while the school secretary dialed 911. By nightfall, the story had spread through Briarwood like wildfire, but Malcolm assumed it would die just as quickly. After all, he had funded half the town, donated to the mayor's campaign, and chaired the school board's development committee. He called the headmaster, demanding the footage be handled internally, threatened to pull funding, and assured his golf buddies the situation would blow over. Yet what he didn't know was that Dr. Brooks had already contacted her attorney, Jasmine Cole, a civil rights litigator known for dismantling corporate giants with surgical precision. By sunrise, a formal complaint had been filed not only for assault and battery, but for racial discrimination, hostile work environment, and violation of civil rights under both state and federal statutes. The total damages sought: $5 million. When reporters from Chicago's local stations arrived at the school gates, microphones raised, Malcolm scoffed, until he saw the security footage circulating online, crystal clear, capturing the slap from 2 angles. His face unmistakable, his son's horrified expression undeniable. The video hit social media before noon, hashtags demanding accountability. Trending nationwide, alumni writing open letters of support for Dr. Brooks, former students sharing stories of how she'd mentored them through college applications, personal crises, and scholarship interviews. Within hours, civil rights organizations had reached out offering support, and the school board scheduled an emergency meeting. Malcolm attempted damage control, releasing a statement through Kensington Development claiming he had been provoked and that the situation was misrepresented. But the public was not buying it, especially after body cam footage from responding officers showed Dr. Brooks declining medical transport while calmly describing the assault, her voice steady despite the swelling on her cheek. Then came the first twist. Trevor Kensington posted a video confession on his private social media, which someone leaked, admitting he had plagiarized the paper and that Dr. Brooks had given him multiple chances to correct it, his voice cracking as he said, "She didn't deserve what my dad did." A statement that shattered Malcolm's narrative. Shareholders of Kensington Development began calling emergency meetings, concerned about brand damage, and the company's stock dipped 3% in a single afternoon. At the first court hearing, Malcolm arrived flanked by high-priced attorneys, but Jasmine Cole came armed with documentation. Emails from Malcolm to the headmaster implying funding consequences, records showing prior complaints of intimidation toward school staff, and expert testimony outlining the psychological impact of public assault in a workplace. As the case unfolded, more layers emerged. 3 other teachers came forward describing instances where Malcolm had berated them over grades given to his son, one recounting a threat to make sure you never teach in this county again, establishing a pattern of coercion. Community opinion split sharply. Some wealthy residents whispering that Dr. Brooks was going too far, others rallying behind her with candlelight vigils outside the courthouse. Yet Dr. Brooks never wavered, continuing to teach through the controversy, though the school placed her on temporary paid leave for safety, a move many saw as institutional cowardice. During depositions, Malcolm's temper flared repeatedly, once slamming his fist on the table when confronted with his own recorded words, a moment that later proved pivotal. Then came the second twist. Forensic accountants uncovered that Kensington Development had quietly pressured the school board for tax abatements in exchange for donations, suggesting a deeper web of influence, and though unrelated to the assault itself, it painted Malcolm as a man accustomed to bending systems. National media picked up the story, panel discussions debating privilege, race, and accountability. And suddenly, Briarwood Heights was no longer insulated. It was Exhibit A in a larger conversation. Malcolm attempted a private settlement offer of $500,000 contingent on a non-disclosure agreement, but Dr. Brooks refused, stating through her attorney that this is not just about money, it's about precedent, a phrase that became a rallying cry. As trial approached, jury selection proved challenging, yet ultimately 12 citizens were seated who swore to weigh evidence fairly. In court, the security footage was played on a massive screen, the slap reverberating through the silent room, jurors visibly recoiling. Dr. Brooks testified with measured clarity, describing not just the physical pain, but the humiliation of being struck in her own classroom building, the fear that her students would see authority reduced to spectacle. Malcolm took the stand against his counsel's advice, insisting he was defending his son's reputation. But under cross-examination, Jasmine Cole dismantled him, highlighting contradictions between his police statement and deposition, forcing him to admit he had not been physically threatened or insulted prior to the slap. The third twist came when Trevor himself was called as a witness by the defense, but ultimately testified truthfully for the plaintiff, acknowledging his father's history of explosive anger and admitting he had begged him to stop during the conference. The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably. Closing arguments were fierce, Jasmine invoking the Constitution Dr. Brooks taught daily, arguing that no citizen stands above accountability, regardless of wealth. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. Unanimous verdict in favor of Dr. Brooks, awarding $5 million in compensatory and punitive damages. Gasps filled the courtroom, Malcolm's face draining of color, as reporters rushed to break the news. Outside, Dr. Brooks addressed the press briefly, saying, "I teach my students that rights mean nothing without the courage to defend them," before thanking her community. Kensington Development's board voted to remove Malcolm as CEO within a week, citing reputational harm. Criminal charges for misdemeanor assault resulted in mandated anger management and probation. Briarwood Preparatory Academy implemented stricter parent conduct policies and diversity training initiatives. Months later, Dr. Brooks returned to her classroom to a standing ovation from students. The once infamous conference room repainted, the science wing quietly renamed after a different donor. Yet the final twist was perhaps the most unexpected. Trevor Kensington transferred schools and later wrote a college essay reflecting on the consequences of privilege unchecked, crediting Dr. Brooks for teaching him the most important lesson of his life: accountability. As for Malcolm, he retreated from public life, his empire fractured, his name no longer spoken with admiration but as cautionary tale. And in living rooms across America, parents, educators, and students replayed that courtroom footage not as gossip, but as a reminder that dignity cannot be purchased nor silenced. This was never just about a slap. It was about power meeting its limit, about a woman refusing to shrink in the face of humiliation, about a community forced to confront uncomfortable truths. And if this story moved you, if it made you believe that standing up matters even when the opponent seems untouchable, then subscribe and stay with us. Because justice stories like this don't just entertain, they empower. and the next one might change how you see the world tomorrow.